comments at the NATO summit, along with the congratulations for the ceasefire that has now been brokered and the emphasis we now need on getting Iran around the negotiating table, for the reason being this: if it's to be irreversible and verifiable, then it is important that that is done through negotiation, and that's what we focused on.
Mark Ferguson.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Prime Minister's statement, especially on defence. Politics is about priorities, and as I know he knows, the most important responsibility of government is defence of the country and defence of its people. So I echo the very sensible points made by the Right Honourable Member for Richmond and Northallerton, sadly, which weren't made by the opposition from bench, particularly his point around our intelligence services. Our intelligence services are the finest in the world. There are those who we will never know and we will never see, who have kept this place safe, our democracy safe and our communities safe. So will he assure me that as we seek to invest more in defence, there is a particular focus on supporting our intelligence services?
Well, he makes a good point. Our intelligence service do an incredible job, and I pay tribute to them. As he will know, from now on, where the intelligence services are contributing to our national defence, that will be included in our defence spend. Not included in 2.5%, that was core defence as always understood, but then to be added to it, which takes it to 2.6% in 2027-2028.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, it won't have escaped anyone's notice that whilst the Prime Minister was rightfully away at the G7 and NATO summits, he made tens of billions of pounds of unfunded spending commitments. Yet next week he expects members of Parliament to vote with him to remove money from disabled people who need help to go to the toilet. How can he justify making a moral argument for security abroad whilst removing security from disabled people at home?
Well, as he will know, when we announced the 2.5% increase in defence spending, we made it very clear where that money was coming from, and it was not coming from welfare spend, as he very well knows. But I believe in the moral duty, and it is a moral duty, to defend our country. That means working with our NATO allies and making sure we have the most effective deterrent. He cannot give lectures on the moral duty to protect our country whilst maintaining a position of casting aside the single most effective deterrent that we have. That is unserious.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I currently visited a NATO Air Force base in Poland as part of the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme that I'm currently partaking in with the RAF. I saw firsthand the importance of working closely with our NATO allies to defend our nation and keep us secure, as we witnessed firsthand a scramble to the skies to ward off Russian fighter jets. Can the Prime Minister confirm that he is prioritising the well-being of our armed forces personnel, both at home and abroad, so that they can continue to keep us and our allies safe?
Well, I thank her for that. It is, of course, Armed Forces Week, and amongst other things, we have given the Armed Forces the single biggest pay increase in many, many years, and made a strong commitment to other aspects, including their accommodation, because it's important that we recognise and reflect what they do for our country, and it's very important that we ensure that we have and able to retain the brilliance in our armed forces.
Sir Bernard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I very much welcome NATO's commitment to 3.5% core defence spending and 5% on a broader definition by 2035 for all NATO member states. But the Prime Minister and the government have only published spending figures up until 2030. Isn't it now incumbent upon the government, and when will the government now publish public spending plans for 2030 to 2035 to show how the 3.5% of core defence spending is going to be met by the government? Otherwise it's just an unfunded promise.
Well, as you will know, when we presented the Strategic Defence Review, we had already set out the path to 2.5 and the ambition to 3%. I think it's right that NATO is now, or all NATO allies have agreed the 5% for 2035. That is, of course, subject to review in 2029, both as trajectory and balance. And the reason for that, as he will understand, is that NATO itself is reviewing its capabilities. in 2029, and therefore that review will coincide with that review of its own capabilities.
Richard Buss.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Diplomacy is the best way to prevent risk, to de-escalate risk, and also to ensure that we get long-term security. So could the Prime Minister tell the House what discussions took place about how to escalate the focus on diplomacy in the Middle East to resolve the situation in Gaza, because clearly the architecture is not delivering at pace, but also the forgotten war in Sudan?
Well, I thank you for a question, and can I reassure you that not just at NATO and the G7, but actually on a daily basis we are having discussions with other leaders about the architecture, about the path, about how we can use diplomacy to get to a ceasefire in Gaza and to get to a much better place in Sudan, and thank her for raising Sudan, not raised often enough. We're doing that at speed. We're trying to bring as many allies with us as possible. I do think that if the Iran ceasefire holds, and I hope that it will, that does create the space for saying now is the time for that ceasefire in Gaza. Only the first step, of course, to the route first to recovery and then to a two-state solution.
Sir Julian.
After a worrying start, President Trump has now strengthened NATO both by extracting promises of more money and by the positive comments he made at the end of the summit. Has the Prime Minister had a chance to assess whether this means that his love affair with Vladimir Putin is beginning to cool?
Well, look, firstly, I think it was really important that NATO was united in the way it was last night. And I don't just mean the comments of President Trump. I mean that the whole 32 on the same page on a really important moment for NATO. And he will understand how much hard work, guile and diplomacy went into ensuring that that was the outcome. But I think it was a real sigh of relief around the world that that was the position. In relation to Putin, look, we are urging that this is the moment to push further to get Putin to the table for an unconditional ceasefire. President Zelensky said for many weeks that he's prepared for those talks, and we did discuss that as allies, and I've discussed it many times with President Trump, as he would expect.
Alan Gavin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Would the Prime Minister care to comment on what our adversaries will think when they hear the Leader of the Opposition mistakenly say we can't afford our defence commitments? Does such a fatuous response keep our country safe?
No, it doesn't. It was frankly embarrassing to suggest I shouldn't have been at NATO or the G7. And I think our backbenchers recognise it. That's not the position traditionally of the Conservative Party. The sooner they get back to that position, the better.
Sir Desmond Swain.
Was there any discussion about the killing zones which currently constitute the provision of humanitarian aid in Gaza?
Yes, there was, and there was real concern about the intolerable position in Gaza and what we can do to alleviate that position. We have repeatedly said that it's intolerable, repeatedly said that the current arrangement for aid are never going to work and can't be maintained. And there is urgent diplomacy going on to try and alleviate that situation. We'll continue in those efforts.
Jas Afwa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I strongly welcome the Prime Minister's announcement on defence spending, especially during Armed Forces Week. Does he agree with me that this is a landmark historic commitment reflecting both the scale of the threats we face and this Labour government's commitment to the security and defence of our country?
Well, I do agree with him. It is landmark. It's very important. It shows the resolve of NATO and it reflects the resolve of this Labour government. I'm pleased that we were closely involved in the crafting and the bringing together of the agreement that was reached yesterday.
Ayab Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The democratic primaries in the most cosmopolitan city in the world has demonstrated that people will no longer support hypocritical and disingenuous politicians. I'm sure the whole House agrees that Iran must not have nuclear weapons. But the Prime Minister, as a lawyer, will understand, I'm sure, that the attack upon Iran by Israel and the US did not engage the Caroline principles, which allow the preemptive strike. Does the Prime Minister agree with that analysis? And if he does not, can he say from that dispatch box that he supported those attacks?
Yeah. Well, Mr. Speaker, if we all agree that Iran shouldn't have nuclear weapons, it's about time we did something about it. And what happened on Saturday night was a big step towards alleviating that threat, and that is really important. I think we now need to complete on that, and the way to complete on that is with the talks that are now needed to get Iran back to the table to make sure that it's irreversible and that it can be verified, and that's what we're focused on.
Kelvin Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's leadership in recognising the need for a strategic response. It's been 35 years since the Options for Change paper began the drawdown of defence spending from 4.1% GDP. We have spent that dividend, gambling we would not need to defend our values, and a generation has benefited from that bet. But we now must take our chips off the table and reinvest in our security. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that we must level with the public about the threats we faced and the cost of underinvestment in our armed forces?
Yes, I do agree, and that's why we've begun the hard work of reversing the damage done under the last government. He's right about the dividend that's been enjoyed. Now we must make sure there's a defence dividend, and that is, as we spend more, that is reflected in good, well-paid jobs in the United Kingdom that boost our economy across all parts of our communities.
Good job.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The former Prime Minister has just welcomed the US military action against Iran at the weekend. Why can't the Prime Minister bring himself to welcome it too?
Well, because I've said we need to alleviate the threat. I've said that take us a huge step towards alleviating the threat. And I've discussed that with G7, with NATO colleagues, and I've discussed it with President Trump. And everybody was very pleased that there was such unity on it.
Joanna Baxter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The forced deportation of children is illegal under international law, and yet Russia continues to steal Ukraine's future one child at a time. So can I please ask the Prime Minister if the issue of Ukraine's stolen children was discussed with our allies, and what more is being done to return those children to their homes and their families?
Well, I thank her for raising this, and she's been a hard campaigner, an important campaigner on this. And it is central that if there's to be a ceasefire and a lasting peace in Ukraine, and I hope there is, that it must involve the return of the children. And we have discussed that many times and will continue to do so.
Mr. Speaker, since the Second World War, our national security has been based broadly on three pillars. Our own physical defences, which the Prime Minister mentioned in his statement, the alliances we've built, which he also mentioned, but the third pillar he did not, and that is the international rules-based order. So what discussion did he have at both or either summit about the importance of international law, the undermining of its credibility by inconsistent application between the conflicts in Ukraine and in Gaza, and in particular, did he try and persuade President Trump to lift the United States sanctions on the International Criminal Court?
I've long been an advocate of the international rules-based order and discussed that regularly with allies, because NATO itself is a rules-based framework and an important one at that. And therefore we do need to maintain those rules-based systems, make sure they're fit for purpose. And I would add that the same is true for trade and the economy as well.
Nozzle Collis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As a member of the cross-party UK delegation to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, I've had the opportunity to meet Ukrainian members of Parliament who continue to make the powerful case for NATO allies continuing to support them. It's also become clear, Mr. Speaker, that in recent months, increasingly other countries in the region, Poland, the Baltic states, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, are growing ever nervous about their vulnerability in terms of Russia's invasion. Can the Prime Minister comment on the UK's efforts and dialogue with those countries during this period, this unsettling time? And does he agree with me that the security of those Baltic states are important for our own national security?
Well, I thank her for raising this, and she's absolutely right. The Baltic states are incredibly nervous at the moment. They have been, frankly, for the last 3 years or so. We engage with them regularly. I engage with their leaders on a regular basis. They've been brought into the coalition of the willing, Mr. Speaker, and on the occasions they can't attend, I have a special session with them because their concerns are of such importance to us.
Tom Gordon.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the increase to defence spending and the revised target. Earlier this year at the Spring Statement, we saw cuts to the ODA, the Overseas Aid budget, to fund those defence increases. The ODA budget is integral to our international security abroad. So will the Prime Minister rule out any further cuts to this budget as part of the defence spending increases?
Well, look, he's absolutely right to emphasise the importance of overseas aid, and that was a difficult decision. I want to put it back up to 0.7 rather than take it down. And in the meantime, I'm exploring other ways in which we can find funding for overseas aid and working with other countries to that end, because I don't think we can just wait until we're in a position to increase the funding again.
Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's statement today and the leadership that he is showing on the world stage in really uncertain times, which, beyond the confines of this place, I know are genuinely welcome in my community in Hertford and Stortford. As we mark Armed Forces Week this week, I know veterans in my constituency and servicemen from my constituency will welcome the government's commitment to strengthening our national security. So for the benefit of my constituents, could the Prime Minister set out a little further how we're supporting our armed forces to keep us safe and honouring the service of veterans across the country?
Well, let me first pay tribute to the veterans in his constituency and across the country. We have put in place a number of initiatives already, particularly in relation to homelessness and veterans, more broadly in relation to accommodation and the support that goes in just to veterans, but also our armed services. That's vitally important as a reflection of their contribution, but also to ensure that for those serving, we deal with the retention crisis caused by the party opposite.
Mark Pitcher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whilst we may disagree on the detail, can I agree with the Prime Minister that as far as possible in this place, it would be better to keep partisan politics out of national security issues? And who knows, I may get the whip withdrawn for saying that, but so be it. There are things that go beyond party politics. So can I thank the Prime Minister for all his hard work in the national security interests of this country. When it comes to the G7, he mentioned sanctions, and he, in his statement, said, I urge the United States to do more on sanctions. Is he aware that the United States is actually urging the United Kingdom to do more on sanctions when it comes to Russia? So can the Magnitsky legislation be widened and deepened so it captures more of Russian assets and also possibly other countries that may have sanctions imposed upon them soon, for example, Georgia? On NATO, Joint Expeditionary Force, which was mentioned in the summit, he will know, having attended the Norway meeting some weeks ago, that the Ukraine is a GEF partnership nation. Could he tell the House if the UK supports Ukraine becoming a full member of the Joint Expeditionary Force, and if so, when that might happen?
Well, I thank him for his questions, but they're all good questions, so I'll endeavour to answer each part of them. In relation to sanctions, which is being discussed intensely, as he will understand, there are two elements to that, really. The first is the immediate application of sanctions in relation to Russia, where we are attempting to make sure that we all act together, so the US, the UK and the EU together, and that is the focus of our discussions and what we're urging on the US. He will know there's a piece of legislation in the US which is ready to go and needs to be coordinated with what we're doing. On the longer term, I think we need to look always at whether there's more we can do within the framework on sanctions, and we can discuss that in this House. On the important point he makes about Ukraine and Jeff, we've been a leading advocate of Ukraine having a bigger role or having a role in Jeff, and Ukraine already has enhanced partnership with the GEF, and that's the first of its kind. That was at the last GEF meeting that we had in Norway just a few weeks and months ago, and we were one of the leading nations pushing for that greater involvement. We'll see over time whether that can be taken further, either with GEF or with NATO, obviously, but it was an important first step, and not only a reflection for Ukraine, but also a message to Russia.
Thank you to the Prime Minister for his leadership representing us around the world in the last few weeks, exactly where he should be. Does the Prime Minister want to remind the party opposite about the fact it was the Labour government which last spent 2.5% of GDP on defence? And can the Prime Minister set out how increasing our defence spending will keep our country safe and support high-quality manufacturing jobs in West Bromwich and the whole nation?
Well, I'm happy to remind the House that we had 2.5% of GDP on defence spending under the last Labour government, and we'll have it under this Labour government. In 14 long years, they didn't do that.
Mr. Macbeth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the increase in defence spending. So will the Prime Minister take this opportunity to explain where the money is coming from, particularly as his government continues to weaken our country's economy and when another expensive benefit U-turn on top of the winter fuel U-turn is on its way?
Well, she must have missed the record investment in our country in the last 12 months, £120 billion, the 4 interest rate cuts and the fastest growth in the G7 in the first quarter of this country. And every time we've increased defence spending, as we did with the 2.5%, we've set out at the same time where that money is coming from.
Mr. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I find the Leader of the Opposition incredibly disappointing, so goodness knows what her own benches think. But while she's talking Britain down, can I commend the Prime Minister for the leadership he's shown this week? And could he say a little more about how businesses in the defence supply chain, particularly in the Teesside Defence and Innovation Cluster, can contribute to this national mission for defence and security?
Well, I'm grateful for him for raising this question. There are 2 or 3 principles here. Firstly, as we increase defence spend, we need to see that reflected in good, well-paid jobs in constituencies across the country. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, there will obviously be the big sectors on defence who will benefit, but we've put together a hub for smaller supply chain businesses, which will be in pretty well every constituency, whether they're defence-specific or not, to ensure that they take advantage of the contracts and the extra spending on defence. And in that way, we can ensure that there's a dividend back in the United Kingdom for the extra spend that we're putting in place.
David Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's been some recent confusion from defence ministers surrounding the purchase of 12 F-35A nuclear-capable fast jets. So can the PM please inform the House when the proposed in-service date is for this important capability?
Well, we made the commitment to the capability. We're obviously now talking to allies about precisely what the timetable will be for that, and I'll update the House. But the important thing is the commitment is there. He will know that this is a commitment to the NATO initiative, bringing us within that initiative, and therefore a lot of moving parts. But the commitment we've made is a very firm commitment, and I'll set out the timeline and progress on it in due course.
Dr. Peter Prince.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So F-35A, hard power. BBC World Service, soft power. Would he agree with me that the World Service is a crucial element of our soft convening power?
Yes, I've long been a supporter of the BBC World Service, and it chimes with the other questions I had about the soft power of this country. We have incredible soft power, incredible strength in our diplomacy, and that very often achieves results in a way that then makes it less necessary to use the hard power.
Then the best subject.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is scepticism in my Huntingdon constituency at how the increase in defence spending might create good local jobs there. But having already pitched to the Chancellor and the Defence Secretary earlier this month to the Procurement Minister alongside my local authority CEOs, Huntingdon is recognised as the home of UK defence intelligence capability, as well as that of US operations in Europe, as well as NATO's. So, given 10% of the equipment budget is now pledged to developing new technology, along with the £400 million Defence Innovation Fund, will the Prime Minister back my commitment to leveraging the designation of RAF Witten as an MOD Trailblazer site to build a defence technology cluster to create highly technical local jobs and build new defence capability from Huntingdon?
I think he's in discussion with our ministers about this, and obviously we look forward to taking that forward. In relation to what he refers to as the scepticism of his constituents in Huntingdon, I want to reassure them through him that this increased defence spend will bring yield to Huntingdon, to his constituents, in the defence-specific sectors, but also in the supply chains as well.
Speaker, I welcome the Prime Minister's statement and his leadership. Can I just return to international humanitarian law?
The International Development Select Committee recently published a report that showed that IHL is under threat like never before, and attacks on aid workers are rising. So can the Prime Minister assure us that the UK will be a champion for IHL, and could he elaborate on conversations on upholding it in relation to Gaza, but also Sudan and the many other countries ravaged by conflict around the world?
We have an absolute commitment to international humanitarian law, and it's extremely important that we keep to that, whether that's in Gaza or in Sudan, and that is the framework through which we make our decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to the evils of terrorism and aggression across the Middle East, all paths lead back to the Iranian regime, be that the sponsorship of Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, or indeed at the heart of that regime, the IRGC. So, whilst I fully appreciate the Prime Minister will not speculate on prescription from the dispatch box, will he at least reflect on how it can be that despite calls from both sides of this House over many, many years to prescribe the IRGC, it still hasn't happened, not least when he took quite right and proper action to prescribe Palestine action after the attack on Bryce Norton last week, that the IRGC still sit unprescribed?
I thank him for raising this. As he knows, we keep prescription under constant review and won't hesitate to take the most effective measures against the Iranian regime. He will know we've already sanctioned the IRGC in its entirety, including individual commanders, but we do keep this under constant review.
Luke Charters.
I praise the Prime Minister for his work on the new 5% target, ensuring that we reach that in terms of national security and core defence. Would he agree with me that just as the last Labour government in the 1940s helped found NATO, that this Labour government could help found a multilateral defence development bank that would ensure we reach the 5% by the mid-2030s?
Well, I thank him for that question, and there is a debate going on across allies as to how we can work together on the increased spending in terms of the spend itself, financial arrangements, whether it's development banks or others, and ensuring that we coordinate our capability and cooperation, because the last thing we want is everybody spending more money, but in an uncoordinated way, and there's been intense discussion about that.
John Cooper.
Mr. Speaker, the situation in Scotland is very difficult. I welcome the news that we are to go further with our at-sea deterrence, and of course the nuclear missile Trident boats are based in Faslane, but as we have heard, First Minister John Swinney and his SNP administration do not back nuclear weapons. Further, they've created a hostile environment for defence firms in Scotland because they will not back any firms which make ordnance. This week we've also heard the former First Minister Humza Yousaf claim wrongly that allowing our American allies to use the Prestwick Air Base to refuel is some kind of war crime. What can we do to nullify the threat to British security from these fifth columnists?
Beat them. But I mean, it is a serious question. This isn't just the usual politics. This is a serious question of national security. The nuclear deterrent, the at-sea deterrent, is, as he rightly says, housed in Scotland. I went and met one of the subs coming back in just a few months ago. It was a very humbling experience, quite frankly, and got an even deeper sense of what they do for our country, and it should be supported in its own right and as an essential deterrent. And it's among the reasons that we need to change a government in Scotland.
John Slinger.
I welcome the Prime Minister's statement, which shows that international cooperation, the ability to forge relationships of trust and human empathy are signs of strength, not weakness. Our country is stronger for his leadership and pursuit of peace globally through diplomatic means.
Hear, hear.
Does my right honourable friend agree that we can only deter war and defend our allies such as Ukraine if outward-looking diplomacy is backed up by ever stronger armed forces and an ever stronger economy? That these matters ought to unify all in this House, and that it's very unfortunate that we've seen petty party political games, frankly, from the Leader of the Opposition.
Hear, hear.
Well, I agree with him, and all I can say is, in fairness, I can see that on the faces of some of the members opposite, there is clearly disquiet at the approach that the Leader of the Opposition took, and it's not surprising.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 5% defence investment pledge, resilience spending appears to include energy infrastructure. Given the evidence about Chinese-made cellular internet modules and kill switches, will you say categorically that China must be kept out of all critical infrastructure, including wind turbines and solar panels?
Well, he's right to raise this issue, and obviously we carefully review and monitor any Chinese involvement in any elements of security. But it is right that we now include resilience in our overall definition of national spend and act accordingly.
Laura Cox.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for his commitment to keeping our country safe and his effective diplomacy to that end. While our international aid budget is now diminished, it remains my belief that the work we do to prevent and respond to humanitarian crises around the world plays a crucial role in global stability and security, and in turn our own. Can the Prime Minister reaffirm his commitment to this vital role for the UK in the world?
Yes, I can, and she's right to raise it and to describe it in the way that she did. And we're a leader on this, continue to be. We want to get our aid budget back up, but in the meantime, I want to work with other countries to find other ways of providing and financing that support as a matter of some urgency.
Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the increase in defence spending, but how on earth is the Prime Minister going to pay for it when his party can't agree on a small reduction in the welfare bill?
We have set out in clear terms when we went to 2.5%, both the date plus the way in which we would pay for it. That's the way we do business on this side of the House. For 14 years, they lost control of the economy, left hollowed out armed forces, armed forces, a 22 billion black hole, and frankly, they're in no position to lecture anyone about these issues. Still less after the response of the Leader of the Opposition, which shows exactly why their party is sliding into irrelevance.
Right, Manali.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's clear today that the Leader of the Opposition should never represent the United Kingdom on the world stage. Absolutely outrageous, Mr. Speaker. But I am grateful to my right honourable friend for his statement, and following the comments of other honourable members, can I ask him what assessment he has made of the potential opportunities for Scottish-based defence and aerospace industries, which already support hundreds of jobs in Coatbridge and Bellsill, arising from the expectation to reach 4.1% of GDP by 2027? And does he share my concern that the disjointed defence policy of the SNP risks jobs and investment in Scotland, and we need to fight that at all costs?
Well, he shouldn't worry too much about the Leader of the Opposition representing our country. She never will. Mr. Speaker, if she did, the chair at the NATO summit would have a little sticky note on it saying "busy at PMQs," presumably. Mr. Speaker, that's how unserious her point is. But on the substantive question of jobs in Scotland, there is the real potential now to build on what Scotland does. It's got a proud history in relation to our defence and security, and this provides an opportunity to build on that platform.
James Shannon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister very much for his statement? I know that nobody in this House can doubt the sincerity of his careful words and his commitment for what is best for the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland at the G7 and NATO summit. The Prime Minister will be aware of my support for Israel, and indeed the support of so many in this great nation. That was, I believe, one of the major issues at the summit. So can the Prime Minister outline, please, whether time was taken with our closest ally, the United States of America, to discuss steps that can be taken to cut the head off the IRGC and to ensure that the USA bombing of the Iranian nuclear programme was a success, and thereby secure a truce and a lasting peace in the Middle East? Thank you.
Well, I can assure him that is an ongoing discussion that we have with our US allies, both at leader level and between our teams on an ongoing and constant basis. Israel has the right to be safe and secure, and it is neither safe nor secure at the moment. We have to be absolutely clear about that and the right of Israel to defend itself. And that means discussions about the IRGC, it means discussions about Iran, which has been a constant source of threat and terror and conflict in the region. And yes, we discussed not just the attack on Saturday, but also the further measures that can be taken to make sure that Iran never has the capability to develop nuclear weapons.
Tricia Fergus.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for his statement and for his leadership, something which I'm sure is welcomed by our allies around the world, if not by the Leader of the Opposition. My right honourable friend mentions that there is now a window of opportunity for peace in the Middle East, and I'm sure that's something we would all want to see happen and come to fruition. However, with deadly attacks on Palestinian people seeking food continuing, can the Prime Minister advise from his discussions whether there is any prospect of Israel allowing the UN and other humanitarian organisations to resume food distribution in an ordered and fair way?
Well, they should do, and we're urging that they do, because the current arrangements are intolerable and they're never going to work. And we need to be really clear about that, and we will continue to urge that with our allies and obviously talking to leaders across the region, as she would expect. But now is the time to push on also for the broader ceasefire to alleviate the situation more generally and allow a path to open for the long-term conflict resolution that's needed.
Riswell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's the role of any government and Prime Minister, and it's their first duty to keep this country safe. I know it's a role that our Prime Minister takes incredibly seriously, which is in stark comparison to what we've seen today from the Leader of the Opposition. The Prime Minister will know when he visited Blackpool, and he has visited Blackpool many times since becoming Leader of our party, that young people told him at my sixth form college they're crying out for local jobs in the Blackpool area to keep them there. Will he ensure that this defence increase of 5%, which is welcome, will create the decent, well-paid jobs on the Fylde coast so young people in Blackpool can get those jobs where they live?
Well, I'm grateful for his question. I've visited Blackpool many times, as he knows. I know firsthand just how important it is for young people to see money going into their economy with jobs in Blackpool for them. And I remember profoundly at a sixth form college in Blackpool asking the group of, I think, 17-year-olds how many of them were proud to be from Blackpool, and they all put their hand up. And when I asked them how many of them thought that their jobs in the future would be in Blackpool, only one of them put their jobs up, because they all thought that they would have to leave Blackpool to get the jobs that they wanted. We need to turn that around. This gives us an opportunity to start doing that.
We now come to Chris Vance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement today? And from a personal point of view, can I thank him for his recent visit to Harlow and the Downs Primary School, which recently received an excellent Ofsted report. Would the Prime Minister agree with me to achieve the sustainable and long-term peace that we all so desperately want in the Middle East, in Gaza, in the Ukraine and in Sudan? We must work together with one voice with all of our NATO allies, and that's why his leadership on a global level is so important, and it's so important that he attends all of these events to represent our proud nation.
Well, I'm grateful. I remember being the most recent visit to the primary school, I think, was to roll out our free school meals policy. So I was very happy to do that, Mr. Speaker, by actually serving school meals myself. So if all else fails, I've got a backup. But Mr. Speaker, he's absolutely right. This is at a time like this. It is actually a time when usually this House comes together and speaks with one voice, and we're the more powerful for it. And I have to say, President Zelensky has told me on a number of occasions how much it means to his people. And to be fairness to the party opposite, they've always been resolute on Ukraine. She needs to look again, the Leader of the Opposition, at her approach. The sooner we get back in a time like this to the kind of cross-party unity we had, the better, because our adversaries know that when they see unity here, that is much more of a problem for them than when they see unserious division.
That completes the statement. Let the front bench change over.
We'll now proceed to read the orders of the day.
By an appropriation, main estimates number 2 bill, second reading.
Now. Minister to move formally.
I beg to move.
Question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Contrary no. The ayes have it. The question is that the bill now be read a third time. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. We now come to the general debate on the Armed Forces Day. Minister Luke Pollard, move.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that this House considers Armed Forces Day. This week, our nation comes together to give profound thanks to the men and women of our armed forces, their families and veterans, the heroes who give so much and sacrifice so much for their country at a time when the world is becoming increasingly dangerous, unpredictable and insecure. Right now, our armed forces are helping Ukraine to defend itself against the might of Russia by supplying kit and equipment, nearly 3.5 years into a war which Putin thought would be over in 3 days. Our armed forces are in Singapore with the UK Carrier Strike Group led by HMS Prince of Wales, strengthening Britain's ties with the Indo-Pacific. They are operating as part of every NATO mission alongside our allies, keeping the peace in zones of potential conflict, and our people are working in the Middle East to de-escalate tensions and stabilise the region. Our armed forces are contributing to UN peacekeeping forces around the world, helping to bring hope to war-torn communities, and they are protecting our shores at home, ready at a moment's notice to respond to any emerging threats. Truly, they are the best of Britain, recognised globally for their professionalism and dedication. And this week, in Armed Forces Week, we have a chance to say thank you, to thank them for their service, to thank their families for their understanding at the times when they are away, to thank those people who support our men and women in uniform, in defence industries, in the supply chain, in the technology companies that help keep them having the fighting edge that keeps our country safe. Now, apart from those affected by COVID restrictions, 2024 was the first year since the inception of Armed Forces Day that there was no national event. This government is proud to have restored it this year, backing 3 days of celebrations in Cleethorpes. And as my honourable friend, the member for Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes knows, it's a community which carries a long tradition of not just honouring our armed forces, but shaping and supporting them too. From the local RAF station at Northcotes, which was home to the Coastal Command Strike Wing during World War II, disrupting enemy supply chains with great success, to active veteran groups today, like NEL for Heroes, which does outstanding work in North East Lincolnshire, helping veterans to return to civilian life. But although the biggest celebrations will be taking place in Cleethorpes, where the Defence Secretary will be this weekend, there are more than 180 other events taking place across our nation. Earlier this week, my ministerial colleague Lord Coker was among the large crowds which turned out in Northern Ireland to celebrate Armed Forces Day. Happy giving way on that point.
Yeah, Mr Deputy Speaker, that I was very fortunate to be there and had an opportunity to meet Lord Coker from the other House. It was very clear to him and I both that the 60,000 people turned out to commend and celebrate such a wonderful occasion. Can I ask the Minister, maybe later on, if you don't mind, would he outline clearly what can be done to recruit more TA soldiers? Will it be flexibility with employers? Will it be the jobs and the courses they can do? Or will it be to enlarge the numbers of cadets, please? Thank you so much.
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, can I thank him for his years of service? It was in Westminster Hall yesterday that he added up all the years that he served in uniform, and I think that was 14.5 years in total in various roles. So can I thank him for his service to our country? It is absolutely vital that we address the retention and recruitment crisis we inherited from the previous government. We're making good progress in that regard. A key part of that is not only recruiting new people to our regular forces, but also making it easier to join the reserves as well. And whether people are serving full-time, part-time in their spare time, there is an opportunity for people right around the country to contribute to our armed forces. My ministerial colleague, the Minister for Veterans and People, will be setting out further steps as to how we're going to improve our reserves as we approach the Armed Forces Bill in the next session of Parliament, making the case that improving our reserves makes us safer, but also provides more opportunity for the nation to have a closer connection with those people who serve as well. Happy to.
I'm very grateful to the Minister. One of the 180 events that he mentioned will be Armed Forces Day in Andover, which I'll be attending on Saturday. As he knows, Andover is home to Land Army headquarters, and I wondered whether he could reflect on the importance of the work of celebrating armed forces in those communities which physically embrace their headquarters and their camps and residences, to sustain that connection between the non-uniformed civilian population and those who protect them on a daily basis.
Well, can I thank him and thank him for his attendance at an Armed Forces Day event this weekend. As someone who represents Devonport, home to Western Europe's largest naval dockyard, I'm acutely aware of the relationship, the important history and the connections today between our military, those civilians that in Devonport's case support the fleet, and our wider community, including veterans. I think it is absolutely right we tell the story of that connection, not just by looking back at the battles of previous years, those people who never returned from wars, but making the case that investing in our defence today creates good, well-paid jobs. It provides opportunities for our young people, and it's one of the sources of great pride, I think, that our Army, our Navy and our Air Force all feature in the top 5 employers of apprentices in the country. It's a huge opportunity to celebrate the skills that we have, but also the connections between our people, because I think all our communities are proud of our armed forces, and this weekend's a great opportunity to say that again.
John Slinger.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He knows that recently I had the great privilege of visiting our base in Erbil in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, where I saw for myself the dedicated service of the troops and their officers who are doing huge work to help that regional government and also thereby enhance regional security and British security. They are a tribute to this country and we owe them a debt of gratitude, and we should remember that there are so many service men and women overseas doing very difficult work, sometimes in harm's way, and on Armed Forces Day we must remember all of those serving officers and soldiers as well.
Well, can I thank him for his remarks just there? I think it is a good reminder that on Armed Forces Day and in Armed Forces Week there'll be parliamentarians on all sides of the House visiting local communities, making the case for armed forces in their communities. But there will be people from communities right round our country who won't be at those celebrations because they'll be serving on the front lines overseas, helping to project UK power and influence, helping to stabilise regions, and helping to make sure that we're de-escalating tensions. And the work that our forces do in the Middle East may have been in the news quite a lot recently, but their work that is often not covered in the news is nonetheless as vital for our national security and worthy of our praise and thanks. And I'm certain on a cross-party basis there is support for the work that they do across the Middle East. My right honourable friend, the Minister for Defence, Procurement and Industry, will be in Liverpool this weekend celebrating alongside her community of Liverpool Garston at Armed Forces Day as events. And the Minister for Veterans and People, my honourable friend for Birmingham, Solioke, will be in Coventry, having completed a tour of many of our communities nationwide, making the case for further investment in services to support our veterans, Mr Deputy Speaker, a vital part of this government's work to support those people who have served. Many celebrations will be taking place across Scotland and Wales, including in Edinburgh, where the Minister for Scotland will be attending, and I will be back home in Plymouth, home to not only Devonport but Stonehouse, the spiritual home of the Royal Marines, where I'll be out on force on the Hoe on Saturday. And for those people not familiar with Plymouth geography and some of our international viewers, the Hoe is a wonderful cliff-top view of Plymouth Sound, and nothing more sinister than that, shall I say. But look, as a son of a Royal Navy submariner, I'm proud to represent my hometown, which is not only steeped in military history, but also plays a pivotal role in protecting Britain today. Having grown up as a Navy brat, I know that many remarkable people in defence tend to dismiss their achievements as just part of the job, a humbleness that defines service in our country. But I know what they do, how they go well beyond the expectations of a normal day job, how they shoulder immense responsibilities with great modesty and, supported by their families, perform the ultimate public service. Through the government's Strategic Defence Review and defence reform, we're putting much more emphasis on our people and on renewing the nation's contract with those who served. The most troubling thing I've seen recently in relation to our people was the Continuous Attitude Survey, which revealed that only a quarter of our service personnel believe they're valued by society. For members who haven't read the latest Continuous Attitude Survey, can I encourage them to do so? It tells a story about what our people think, and although we're now seeing morale stabilising after a decade of falling across all three of our services, the fact that they don't feel valued by society should be a wake-up call for all of us about how we talk about our armed forces, how we support our armed forces. Happy giving way.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and I apologise for not being in the chamber when he referred to my constituency. Earlier this weekend we will be hosting National Armed Forces Day, which is going to be fantastic, and the comments that he's making there about remembering our veterans, remembering our people, Saturday will be a true celebration and all of the work that so many people put into making sure that we are safe and secure every day.
Minister.
Well, can I thank her for all the work that she put into making the case as to why Cleethorpes should be the first of the renewed National Day events. I know the Defence Secretary is looking forward to attending events in Cleethorpes this weekend and to hearing from not just those people who serve today, but the young people of the cadets in her community that may well be those people who serve in the future, and those veterans who have served our nation as well. I'm looking forward to events in Plymouth, but I know that the events in Cleethorpes will be the centre of our national attention this weekend, and rightly so.
Sir James Cleverly.
I appreciate the Minister giving way. Will he recognise that the UK's armed forces are a visible manifestation of the philosophy and values that underpin the country? And if society does not value the armed forces, might he concede it is because consistently, I think, we have failed to defend the principles and values that underpin our society? And we should confront the accusations that this, for example, is an inherently racist country, which it absolutely is not. And confront the accusations that our history is not something we should be proud of, because perhaps then a wider society will appreciate the men and women who defend not just the physical country, but our values, our history, and our philosophy.
Well, can I thank the right honourable gentleman for that intervention, and I share his passion for telling our nation's story. To tell our full story, we have to explain the good bits and sometimes the bad bits as well. But at all times, we can look at the bravery, the courage and the service of our armed forces as a source of national pride. But I also look at our armed forces today as the embodiment of some of our British values. I believe in equality. It's something that for me is very important to me personally. But when I think about our soldiers that are operating in Estonia at the moment, being ready to deter a Russian move across the border, it does not matter what the colour of the skin of the soldier is, what religion they have, where they come from, what their accent is. All that matters is that in that unit, everyone has each other's backs. Proud of our country, proud of the service, proud of the reasons that they are there. And I think at Armed Forces Week, it's an opportunity to remind people about what the difficult jobs we ask people to do and to thank them for it. But the right honourable gentleman is entirely right, talking about the values that stand behind the uniform and why the flag that they have on their arms matters so much. It's not just a piece of cloth, it is British values that we should be proud of, all of us. And for that reason, I think it is important that we recognise that our service personnel need to feel more valued. The figure has plummeted over the past 12 years, and we know that words won't address that problem, only action will. And that's why it's so important to award our service personnel their biggest pay rise for over 2 decades, and to follow it up with another above-inflation pay rise this year. And for the first time, as a source of great pride to me as the Minister for the Armed Forces, we can say that every single person in uniform is now paid the living wage. That should always have been the case, but sadly was not, but it is now. They deserve a lot more than just a decent salary. The cold, damp and mouldy homes that many have been living in are frankly a betrayal of their service. So after buying back 36,000 homes from the private sector sold off under a previous Conservative government, that saves taxpayers more than £600,000 a day in rent payments. We're delivering a generational renewal of military accommodation with at least £7 billion of funding in this Parliament to help tackle the poor state of forces housing. Happy to.
And I thank the Minister for his statement and take the opportunity to also mark an important week for our armed forces. And I welcome everything he's saying about the support to our armed forces, but also to their families in the way of investment in the homes and also more money in their pockets. Does he agree with me that supporting our armed forces goes way beyond just the equipment they need on the front line, but it's about making sure that their families are supported and valued through the support we can give them as a government, but also in the communities that they live in?
Minister. I couldn't agree with the Honourable Lady more. It is so important. I think in this debate, and I am somewhat guilty of this occasionally, Mr Deputy Speaker, many of our defence debates have been about kit, has been about platforms, and if it's anywhere near me, has often been about frigates. And we talk about the equipment. We need to talk about our people more. That's at the heart of the Strategic Defence Review, but also at the heart of this government's policy is talking about the families of those people who serve more. So that's why the Armed Forces Commissioner Bill that we are placing through the House, that I hope will become law soon, puts an emphasis on allowing service families to access the Commissioner, to make a case that it is the whole defence family, those people who serve in uniform and their family members that back them in service, that need to be valued by this nation. And I believe on a cross-party basis that is a view that is shared. What we now need to do is to make sure it's featured in our legislation and in the day-to-day operations of our military. There's more to do on that. Happy to.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the